Released in 2003 for the original Xbox, WWE RAW 2 is the follow-up to the rather lackluster WWF RAW video game that was released a year prior, and seems like the folks at Anchor Entertainment were able to improve on or add to RAW's foundation. There are more match types, more superstars, more arenas, and perhaps most of all, the gameplay has been somewhat overhauled to a much more playable and tolerable form. But is it a substantial improvement over the previous game, or is it just more of the same? Well, it's been a few years since I last touched RAW 2, so let's venture into Titan Towers together before they sell the place off and move on to some shithole in Connecticut that feels as generic as the product they've been putting out today. But that's another story for another time to be told by somebody else. I guess we'll start with the feature list, which has been expanded greatly from the first RAW game. RAW 1 had a few basic match types, tournaments, and some shallow championship modes. RAW 2 expands on that quite a bit. In regards to the match types, you have the gimmick matches, the steel cages, the ladder matches, Hell in a Cell, Royal Rumble, the usual suspects, all done to varying degrees of quality, but whatever, they're in there, so that's something at least. It's better than what you had before. In terms of game modes, you have your usual exhibition, tournaments, King of the Ring, and in another lifetime, you had online play, but nowadays, not so much. Instead of old-style championship modes where you beat everyone to win a belt, you have a season mode where you can take control of superstars and guide them through the ranks and flimsy storylines of the WWE Universe. It's straightforward fare for the most part. Each month comprises a Raw, a SmackDown, and a pay-per-view event. Each have a full card booked, and during the bits where you're not booked in a match, you can do stuff. You can steal stuff from other superstars, resulting in extra items for your creator wrestler, interfere in matches, get into fights and backstage, all sorts of stuff. But sometimes your efforts will fail and you'll lose some spirit, which tends to refill a bit after each show anyway. It's a season mode, it's not the most sophisticated, not too elaborate, and there's a couple quirks in there like the women competing for the men's titles and things of that nature. But for those who care about season modes and their sports entertainment simulator things, this gets the job done well enough. WWE RAW 2 gives you 64 WWE superstars to play with, and unlike the first game, this roster is up to date, at least as far as 2003 is concerned. Also, unlike the first game, all 64 superstars are available from the get-go, which means you don't have to unlock anybody. The only things you unlock in the season mode are arenas and some items for the creator wrestler mode, which is pretty much the same thing as you got in the previous game. And so much more. You have 2 appearances per wrestler, so you could give them alternate costumes. You could customize their looks, moves, stats, relationships, mess around with their heights and weights, give them goofy gimmicks. You could even manipulate the existing roster, albeit as new characters, and change their outfits, mannerisms. Oh man, I had either forgotten or never gave enough credit to how stupidly enjoyable this was, and it makes me regret having lost all my old saves years ago, because this is one of those things that's fun to mess with. And oh, wait, I like this. Wait, hold on. I just want to see this. This is funny. Here we go. Whee! Ugh. They need to bring this back for the current games. I don't care. So RAW 2 gives you a bunch of new shit to play with, but what about the gameplay? Well, RAW 2 overhauls the gameplay to a point where it feels like a refined version of what you had in the previous game. Unlike in RAW 1, where players shared a voltage meter in a tug-of-war affair, each player in RAW 2 has their own voltage meter, which changes colors and builds as you hit moves. Once it's charged, you can execute your finishing move. On a whole, it's a far better setup than what they had before, and as such improves the playability to a more enjoyable level. Control is something of a mixed bag. While it's nowhere near as convoluted as the previous game and is a drastic improvement as a result, it's also not quite as polished as it ought to be. Both the D-pad and left analog stick moves your wrestler, with the stick making your wrestler run. I'll admit it's a unique approach as opposed to having a run button, but it doesn't quite work well, and usually results in missed moves and grapples. Other than that, the grappling works as well as expected, response time is adequate with some snags here and there, and like I said, it's a better control setup than RAW 1, which is much appreciated. Much like its predecessor, RAW 2's visuals are arguably its greatest strength, although whether it's a step above the previous game is up to personal preference. The wrestlers seem to have adopted some sort of cel-shaded appearance that offers a bit of a unique look, but ends up making them look less detailed as a result, which is surprising because you figure the Xbox could have produced better looking visuals. But whatever. Most of the arena sets and backstage areas are fairly accurately reproduced from the 2002-2003 arena sets. You have a fair amount of clipping when it comes to dealing with bigger wrestlers, but that's to be expected. The lighting in the arena is a touch better compared to the previous game. A fair improvement over the first game, although the cel-shaded look might turn off a few people due to it looking cheap and low-tech, but I don't know, it looks alright. I've seen worse on later consoles, to be honest, so. Audio-wise, well, there's no in-game commentary, which might disappoint some folks, but personally, I always found commentary repetitive and off-putting, even when it's done well, so this was no real loss. Although you do have ring announcers for the entrances, whether it be Howard Finkel or Lillian Garcia, depending on the show, which is a nice touch. You have all the wrestler themes in there, including those done by actual bands. And if you wanted, you could actually assign custom music to your created wrestlers. Yes, created wrestlers coming into whatever spare music tracks were on your Xbox hard drive, a feature that I'm amazed hasn't made a comeback in more recent WWE games, although considering the current climate with copyrights and Content ID, I can almost understand why nobody would want to bring this feature back. There's also the stock generic music during the gameplay and in-between bits that seem to have been ripped from one of the SmackDown games, I think Here Comes the Pain or something like that, which is interesting if nothing else. The sound effects are fine, nothing noteworthy. Audio-wise it's okay. Overall, WWE RAW 2 is several steps above the original WWF RAW game and could very well be one of the better wrestling games to grace the Xbox. I realize that's probably not saying a whole lot considering what else is on the system, and truth be told, it's never going to match the quality of the SmackDown games on PlayStation 2, or even the GameCube offerings for that matter. But RAW 2 has enough going for it that it's pretty close to being a good game despite a few flaws, and it's worth your time. Xbox owners looking for the sports entertainment fix might not have many options, but at the very least there's one good game in RAW 2. Which is good because the game that came after didn't turn out as well, but that's another story for another time.